All right, welcome. Can you hear me out there? Give me a sign if you can hear me. All right, we'll get this thing started here in a little bit. Let's give it a little bit of time for people to catch up. Maybe wait a minute or two. Share this thing if you got anybody out there you think that will be interested. This is a little bit of an experiment. We're not doing a regular family group tonight, but we're going to talk through some things. So I'd also like to do this as a question and answer if you have anything going on. I'm going to go through some stuff here on my end, but if you guys have any questions, I'd like you to shoot the questions and tell me. And even if you're out there right now, if you have any certain topic that you want to talk about or anything on your mind, we can kind of start there if anybody has any topic. Just to tell everybody real quick who I am. My name is Rich Jones. I'm the CEO here at Favor Greenville. I have a master's degree in sociology with a concentration in addiction studies. I got an MBA. I've run a lot of different organizations. I'm a licensed clinical addiction specialist, that kind of stuff. I'm also a person in long-term recovery myself, interventionist, just all these different things that I've done working in this field. But really, I try to bring my own personal experience into this conversation as much as possible. And then also I'm a family member. I've dealt with some things on that end as well, so I try to bring that perspective. So if you have anything going on related to family, anything going on out there that you want to check in on or any certain topics, shoot them my way. Otherwise, I'm just going to start talking because that's what I'm best at, is just talking. So let's just wait here a couple minutes to see if anybody has anything going on that they kind of want to go through. What is the line for loving someone to death? If someone relapses after years, do you believe that is a choice? Really good questions. Let's start with this whole idea of loving somebody to death, and it feeds into some of the stuff that I was going to talk about tonight around codependency, and I was going to try to clarify some things I talked about last week related to tough love. You know, it's not. I don't want to go too extreme when I start talking about tough love. You know, there's a lot of things that have been done wrong in the name of tough love. You know, it's Miss Pat Edwards thinks a lot of you. That's good to know. I think a lot of Miss Pat Edwards. I can tell you that right now. But anyway, getting back to tough love. So this idea that you got to put the hammer down, all right? That you got to throw your foot down, and you'll hear people say some extreme things. Like the thing I always want to talk about is somebody who said, I heard somebody say one time, you know, I won't even give him a bologna sandwich. Kick him out of the house, don't have anything to do with them, and don't even give him a bologna sandwich. And I made a little bit of fun about that last week. But I don't want to go too extreme with that, because what I want to tell you is that there is a place to set boundaries. And when you get into this idea of, you know, can I love somebody to death? I don't think that you can love somebody to death. I think that's the wrong way of saying it, because it implies that as if there's something wrong with loving someone. You can't actually love someone to death. What you can do is that you can, due to your own enmeshment, due to your own codependency issues, due to the fact that it's hard for you to set these boundaries, you can do things and you can engage in behaviors in the name of love because it makes you feel better in the moment. You know, you start doing things, you start trying to help the person. Maybe you pay the rent when you shouldn't pay the rent. Maybe you bail them out of jail when you shouldn't bail them out of jail. But it's not that you're loving them to death, it's that you're expressing the love in not necessarily the most effective way. Because one of the things we got to remember about love involves setting boundaries. If you think of a little child, if you allow that child in the name of love to do whatever they want to do, to go wherever they want to go, to walk through the neighborhood all by themselves because they want to go see their friends, to drive your car because they think that would be entertaining, to play video games all frickin' day. All these different things. Love involves saying no. And that's one of the things that's very, very hard for people to realize. And so where addiction is concerned, what happens is if you look at like this idea of codependency, it's basically where the rules and the expectations and the way that you do things within the family gets into a situation where people become overly connected. The word you'll hear, the term is enmeshed. And as the addict moves, the codependent moves. And if the codependent is down, the addict is down. If the codependent is up, the addict is up. So when you're in a situation like that, you could see as a parent or as a spouse or as a loved one, you would give in to the person because when the person is feeling better, you're feeling better. So it's a very, very complex process. I don't think it's ever as simple as you're loving them to death. But I do think that we all need to reevaluate, and we all need to talk about how do we set these boundaries and how do we have a good, healthy relationship with our loved one. But I don't think it's as simple as I love them to death. The other question that came up was this idea, if a person is in long-term recovery and they relapse, is it a choice? That's a really, really interesting question because we know that addiction involves, it's a brain issue, right? People debate, and a lot of people are like, I don't like the term disease. I prefer the term disorder. It's really not a disease, Rich. I think we can all agree that it's something other than a choice. That whenever you kind of cross that line and your brain changes and you got this neurotransmitter named called dopamine, and you got these other issues going on that some of your rational decision making goes out the door. So I would go to bed every night and I'd say I'm never going to do that again. I'd wake up by the next morning, and there were other factors involved. In my case, I was addicted to opioid-based painkillers, and so I would be going through withdrawal, and I would compulsively use. We understand why a person uses in that situation. I think families get that, and they understand like the person doesn't have any positive momentum. But how do you make sense of the fact that the person has had a lot of, you're right, Aaron, it's absolutely a mental obsession. But how do you make sense that over time, as time goes by, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years, maybe even 6 months, they escape that initial attraction. They escape that initial tractor beam. Let's think of it that way. And they're free of active addiction. Is that a choice? Okay, now here's what I think. And again, all these situations are very, very individualized. I don't know if it's a choice. It's probably a choice in terms of the behaviors that they started to engage in. A lot of times you'll hear people who have a bunch of time, what they wind up doing is they wind up falling into old patterns of behavior. And it's a choice. So I'm 16 years into this, 17 years into this, and I have a choice on where I go tonight. I have a choice on whether or not I get in my car and I drive to a bar, or I drive to the dope man, or I do whatever I do. I have a choice on whether or not I do that or whether I go straight home. See, you understand that? I do think that what can happen is as you start to make these decisions, you put yourself in a process of relapse. It starts you down a road of relapse. And I think there's a lot of choices involved then. Here's what we always say. We always say no matter what's going on, no matter what stage the person's in, if they slip up or they lapse or there's a recurrence or whatever term you want to use, that the most important thing is that they get right back on track. Here's an interesting fact. There's this thing called the abstinence violation effect. And if you've ever been on a diet, you've experienced this. The abstinence violation effect is whenever you screw up, you slip up, you make a mistake, and then you throw the towel in. So this is the person who's on a diet, and they go by the break room, and there's some Oreo cookies in there, and they hammer down one Oreo cookie, and the next thing you know, they're like, screw this, I'm going out, I'm gonna get my money's worth. And you hear that where recovery is concerned all the time. So we always tell family members that, it's going to be angry. You're going to be angry. It's going to be aggravating. You're going to want to punch the person in the face. Like if I go out tonight and I go home, my wife's not going to be like, oh, Rich, it's just a disease. Come on in. It's a chronic relapsing disease. That's not going to happen. She's not going to respond that way. She's going to probably punch me in the throat. Like a real quick, kind of like ninja jab. Right in the throat. I might not even see it coming. I won't have time to defend myself. And so she's gonna get angry. But here's what we want families after that initial anger, and you have a right to be. I get that. I understand why you would be upset after that initial anger. Can you get right back on track? Can the person get right back on track? We actually know that the results are pretty good for people who keep trying. We also know that 9 out of 10 people quit trying. And again, I would tell you, I would challenge yourself. Oh, Julia's on there. That means Sam's on there. Shout out to Sam. If Sam hears this, tell her to say something on the comments. My girl is watching with me. She is learning. Shout out. All right. So going back to this. So if you're trying to do anything and you make a small mistake, you tend to throw the towel in and you tend to just go for it, balls to the wall. We don't want that. We want you to slow this thing down and get yourself back on track. So again, the term codependency kind of falls into and it plays into how family members handle these situations. And again, the thing that I want to tell you about that is it's because you become so enmeshed with the person that when they're up, you're up. When they're down, you're down. So you have this tendency to try to do things to keep them up. Does that make sense? Because you want to be up. And that's what's going on. And there's all kinds of different rules and characteristics and things that start to go on with the person. If you're going through this and you're living with a loved one who's dealing with this issue, some of the identifying things that you want to look for, some of the common characteristics that you would be dealing with. Difficulty identifying your own feelings. I hope that makes all kind of sense. But if you're living with a loved one in addiction, what happens is you literally start to live your life for that person. And when somebody asks you how you're doing, you'll start talking how are you doing today, Rich? Oh, I'm doing okay because Billy's back and he's back in meetings and it's going really, really well. I start to be unable to identify my own personal feelings because it's all about the other person. And then along with difficulty identifying feelings is difficulty expressing feelings. When you fall into this deep kind of codependency, not only can you not identify, you become afraid to express yourself. I'll give you an example. You become afraid to get angry about an anger-producing situation because you're afraid how the person's going to react. So you eat your feelings. You ever hear the term stuff your feelings? You just eat your feelings. And you're not going to say, and again, given the fact that you have trouble even identifying what you're going through because you've basically given your feelings to your loved one, you can't tell what you're going through and you certainly can't express what you're going through. A lot of people who are dealing with codependency issues fall into black or white thinking. Everything's either wonderful or everything's horrible. There's no in between. I've seen that a lot. Johnny's either doing great and I'm happy as can be and he's going to make it. It's going to be wonderful. Or he slipped up or he quit going to meetings and I guarantee that the world is going to fall apart. It's one or the other. It's black or white thinking. The other thing that can happen is that change can become very difficult. Change not directly related to the individual with addiction, but change of any kind can become very, very difficult for a person if they're too deep into a codependent relationship. Because what that does is that upsets the status quo, and the status quo, that's dangerous. If things aren't predictable, that's dangerous for people. They can get very, very upset. They can get very, very concerned. They can catastrophize around that issue. So adjusting to change is a big deal. And then, of course, you start to feel overly responsible for the feelings and behaviors of others. It's really about how other people are doing. We've talked a little bit about that already. Difficulty making decisions. You're not sure what's going to go on because you're not acting in your own best interest. You're not making decisions for yourself. You're making decisions in light of what's going on with your loved one. And then, of course, these feelings of hopelessness and powerlessness. I've seen this in families, and I feel for it. And I get it, man. I get it. You start to get so down about the situation, you start to think this will never get any better. Learn helplessness. Learn helplessness. I can't do anything about this. No matter what I try, nothing changes. A basic sense of shame, and we've talked about the stigma a lot in our groups. A basic sense of shame around the issue. You don't really want to talk to anybody. And this starts to bring you down. It starts to be like a cycle. It's a downward cycle that just... Think about you get on this spin cycle and you just start to go down and you go down and you go down. And another thing that happens when you're dealing with these issues of addiction, you're dealing with codependency, a lot of times a loved one will isolate themselves. They will isolate themselves and they won't want to go out of the house. So they'll stay in. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm not going to do anything. I don't want to talk to anybody. I certainly don't want to talk to anybody about what's going on in my family. And then we know for sure, I don't know if you've seen some of the work that's coming out around Gina just weighed in. Stop talking about me, Rich. I'm watching. I'm not talking about you, Gina. It's not about you. Although some of this may apply. I get it. But I don't know if you've been hearing any of the work that's being done around depression. One of the things that they're getting into related to depression is that the number one indicator of depression, or the number one cause of depression, is loneliness and isolation. Think about that for a minute. Number one cause of depression. It's not serotonin. All that bullshit we were sold about serotonin. That was all the pharmaceutical company doing their thing that they do. Pumping out this false information that depression is about serotonin. Depression is mostly about lack of connection with other human beings. And so when you're going through this, think about how this works. Think about how this cycle works, guys, for family members. You're going through this, you start to get upset, and you start to get down a little bit, and that makes you want to stay in the house. That makes you not want to talk to anybody. That makes you not want to see anyone, okay? So now you don't want to see anyone, so you stay inside, and you're isolating yourself, and you're keeping yourself from other human beings, which is the one thing that could actually break through this and help you. And you start to spin out, and you start to spin out, and you start to spin out, and the next thing you know, you can't get out of bed. Do the opposite of what depression says. Exactly. Karen just said, do the opposite of what depression says. Absolutely. By the way, this format that I'm doing right now, I need to know what people think, and I need you to share this, and I'll do this. I will do this format that we have right now occasionally, but I'm not going to do it if people aren't going to tune in. So let people know we're here. Share this. Let's get enough people on here to make it worth all our while. All right. So shame, low self-esteem, all those things start to happen. It builds up. You start to enter into depression. A couple other things that we know will happen in terms of dealing with codependency and dealing with these issues. Basically, you fall into patterns and you fall into behaviors. And each individual in the family takes up those patterns and those behaviors, and they're relatively predictable. So and we talked about this last week at length. If you're used to getting in arguments with people, and you're used to being confrontational, or you're used to isolating yourself, or you're used to being avoiding, you'll fall into these very, very familiar patterns. And as you do this, many of the times that's where the codependency will start to take place. And it'll basically be, the reason why the codependency will start to take root is you're not even noticing that it's there. It's very similar to the development of addiction. Think about how addiction unrolls. Addiction, I've shared this about addiction in my life. It's not like it's there one day it's not like it's not there one day and all of a sudden you wake up and you're addicted. That's not what goes on whenever you're dealing with addiction. It's more like a fog that sets in over time. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's the same thing with codependency. It's like a fog that sits in over time, and it's based on your behaviors and your roles and your predictable function within the system. Now, the good news with that is if you've established those, you can break those. It's kind of like refire to rewire. If you start to do different things, it'll affect the whole entire family, but you can break out of those codependent patterns. Absolutely. You know, there are rules that start to get established, like don't trust, don't feel, don't talk about this anywhere, that kind of thing. And again, what happens is you get to this situation where it's very blurred on where do you start and where does the other person end. And you hear this term enabler. I'm not a big fan of enabler. But you know, enabling basically means you kind of rescue the person. Now, when you think about rescuing the person, the part of that process that's very, very interesting is there's a payoff. And I talked about this earlier today. When you first start rescuing the person, there's a big payoff. There's probably even a dopamine hit. That's my argument. But as time goes on, the payoff starts to come back and haunt you. It actually becomes self-destructive. But remember, when you first start getting into these enabling behaviors, you're doing it because it works. I mean, here's one of the things. If you go and you rescue your loved one, if you give them money, when you do that, you feel better. Why do you feel better? You get to see them. You get to see that they're okay. You think they're going to be all right for a night. Maybe they're going to be able to get something to eat. All those different types of things. So what's the key to to all of this? What's the key to this whole entire process? It's to start to identify your own feelings. It's to start to identify your own boundaries and start to learn how to set those boundaries. That's the key to this whole entire process. To understand that this has happened over time and to not be hard on yourself, but to start to take stock of the situation. What's interesting is you'll be faced with all these different types of questions and all these different types of circumstances. And if you learn to set boundaries and you learn to trust your gut, some of these questions will be easier to answer. I don't know if you've ever had this experience. Have you ever had this experience early on in recovery, or early on in this process with your loved one, early on in family recovery, where like a question will come up? You know, should we pay for his apartment? He's going back to college. This is actually a question that came up. Should we pay for his apartment? He's going back to college. But he's not really ready to engage in any type of recovery program. That type of thing. And you get you start to question yourself. You know the answer to this question. It pops in your head immediately. No, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't do that. We feel like we're setting him up for failure. But then the person pushes back. Come on, Mom. Come on, Dad. You got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. You guys are crazy. Y'all are the one who needs help, not me. I got this. I got this thing. I could do this. And so all that stuff starts to go on. And then you start to question yourself. You had the decision clear in your mind, but now you start to question yourself. I'm not so sure I should do that. Maybe we're being too hard on him. That's when you work on setting these boundaries and working on trusting your own intuition. You got to also remember there's no right or wrong answer to the majority of these things. There's no right or wrong answer. Now let's go back to why do you do these behaviors in the first place? Why do people engage in enabling behaviors in the first place? Okay? The first reason, they could be deluded about the situation. And here's what I mean by that. They may not actually be aware of the substance of what's going on with their loved one. They're a little bit clueless. This could be called denial or pre-contemplation, or blissfully ignorant. We've all kind of been there. Think about that. There's a period of time when maybe you were paying the bills. There's a period of time when maybe you were bailing the person out when you just truly didn't know what was going on. So that's one reason why people enter into enabling behaviors. Another reason is you just get worn out. How many people out there have engaged in enabling behaviors because the person just beat them down and they just don't have the energy to say no? Because you know when you say no that the person is going to push back. By the way, I'm sponsored by LaCroix. Let me take a drink. Actually, I'm not sponsored by LaCroix, but I should be. I'm sure that their sales are going to go way up now. So the first is deluded about the situation. The second is you're just so beat down. You're so tired. You feel like you can't do anything about it anyway. What the hell? I'm the world's worst parent. I'm not even going to try. A third reason why people enable, a third reason why people rescue, they're scared. They're just straight up frightened for their person that they love, and they think that if they set these boundaries, something horrible is going to happen to the person. We all know that, right? If I tell them they got to leave the house because they're using in my house and that's a boundary for me, well, they're going to wind up on Joe Smith's couch down the street. And Joe Smith's one of the worst guys in the world. We don't want him going down the street and living on Joe Smith's couch. I hope there's nobody out there named Joe Smith. I apologize if you are. And then I talked about number 4 already, but that's where you actually get good feelings from helping the person. You want to play the role of rescuer. And you need to take your own inventory in this area, guys. You need to look at what you got going on. You got to remember, this isn't about anybody doing anything wrong. This isn't about you being a bad person. This is about just trying to figure out what's going on psychologically, what's going on internally that's driving some of these decisions. And as you start to learn about yourself and you start to know what it is that drives you, you may start to be able to make some different decisions. You know, if you're deluded about the situation, you have to learn about it. Now, and you also might have, it might be a circumstance where you're not deluded, but other people in the family are deluded. I've heard that a lot, right? You have situations where there are a lot of folks in the family who are very, very deluded about what's going on. Like, mom sees it for what it's worth, but dad thinks it's no big deal. Or, the wife sees it for what it's worth, but the person's mom doesn't see it as any big deal. So many people can be deluded about the situation. If you're tired and you're just beat down by the circumstance, you got to get some help. You got to get some support. I want you to know and understand something. That one of the most powerful things you can do is get around other people. We're all together right now on this Facebook Live, and we're sharing things, and people are typing things in, and people are being vulnerable with each other. But also get to a group and get around people, get around other people, and they can help lift you up. And if you're tired, elicit support from other people in your family. One of the things you have to be careful of is in any given family, there's usually like one person who will take point. There's usually one person who will be responsible for everything. You got to share the load with this thing. Feelings of fear. I talked about this last week where we were talking about feelings of fear. And by the way, if you have any questions, please weigh in. Please hit me up with any questions you have. But feelings of fear are one of the hardest to overcome. There's this thing called anticipatory grief where people are actually literally they're waiting for their loved one to die. And that's so absolutely horrible. And it makes it so hard to set a boundary. It's very hard to say no if you're fear-based. Now, if you're getting good feelings from this, and that's the reason why you keep doing it. If you're getting a payoff, then this is one where you just got to be responsible. And you just got to take a look at the situation, and you got to be honest with yourself and say, I'm doing this because I get a payoff. And you may have to take drastic action to pull yourself out of that cycle. You got to remember that you didn't cause this, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. We've all heard that, right? That's the classic stuff around this issue. So again, guys, hit me up with any questions that you have along the way. I'm going to move into a couple other things now and talk a little bit about some other responses. All right. Now remember, Julia just says, Sam says she's good. Next week, Teen Recovery Live. Oh, interesting idea. Can you imagine me doing Teen Recovery Live? Let me try out my stance a little bit. Sam, let me know how I'm doing. What up, yo? What up, yo? Welcome to Teen Recovery Live. You know what we're going to do today? We're going to have the great marijuana debate. Here we go, all right? Now I'm really going to go off here. Dude, it comes from the earth like a goat or an apple, man. No big deal. All right, sorry about that. I was breaking off my teen recovery preview. Now remember, when you're dealing with the person and you start to walk your way through this and you're trying to change and you're trying to set your boundaries, you're trying to do different things, remember what you're dealing with. We talk a lot about this. You got to remember that it's a little bit baffling to try to talk to somebody in active addiction. Right? You're speaking English, they're speaking French. So as you start to try to set these boundaries and you start to try to work through this with people and you get to a situation where you're basically saying, okay, I'm going to set this boundary, I'm going to start to say no, you have to remember what you're up against. We've shown pictures of this. We've shown pictures of the brain, and we know that something fundamentally changes. And it's not as easy as just putting out a rational argument and expecting the person to follow because there are consequences associated with it. You're going to have to communicate it more with your actions than with your words. And so remember what we say about boundaries. Mean what you say what you mean, but don't say it mean. Find a calm time to communicate these things. Let the person know exactly what your expectations are, and then be prepared to follow through. Sometimes if you're in the middle of a crisis situation, the only thing you can do, guys, is that you're going to have to seek the help of emergency services. If somebody's being abusive to you or somebody's being threatening or somebody is putting you in danger, you have to call 911. Otherwise, you can start to move through this process in a deliberate manner. And you got to remember, we're dealing with an imperfect system. One of the things that will go on with families a lot is they will become frustrated by the system. I'll tell you a scenario in South Carolina. I don't know what it's like in other parts of the country. Weigh in if you have this going on in other parts of the country too. But in South Carolina, we have an involuntary commitment if a person is having a really, really difficult time. You can go and you can file this paperwork and the person will get picked up, but frequently frequently what happens is the person's in there for like 72 hours, or he's in there for like 12 hours and he's out right away. And this frustrates the crap out of family members. And this goes back to family members feeling powerless. You're going to have to learn how to work within this imperfect system. You're going to have to learn how to work within this imperfect system in terms of payment. You know, we talk a lot about how much rehab costs and the reality of that. And it isn't like, I mean, there's no guarantee that it's going to work. So you have to try to work and appeal and work through your insurance company and file claims and send them to us at Favor Greenville. We can help you with this. We can help advocate for you. But you got to remember, you're dealing with an imperfect system, because what I'll see happen is that families, they'll get so frustrated. Can you hear me out there? Can you let me know if you can hear me out there? Guys, I feel like I'm having some technical difficulty. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Somebody said something about no voice. All right. So let's go into this a little bit further. Also, guys, if you have any questions, please send me the questions. I'll answer your questions on here. Send me the questions. You also have to remember where your decision making is concerned. So you're dealing with these issues of codependency. And again, let's just sum up codependency. Codependency is this idea of when the person moves, you move. If the person's up, you're up. If the person's down, you're down. So that's going to motivate you to make decisions not in your best interest. The second thing that's going to be going on is that most of the time you're going to be making these decisions from an emotional standpoint. And it's this idea of system 1 versus system 2 thinking. It's this idea of trauma-based thinking, fight or flight. The other thing that happens to family members as they go through this process, it's not all about codependency, it's also about a trauma response or an automatic response. Your brain is conditioned to move into automatic pilot when they're faced with any kind of threatening situation, when you're faced with any kind of threatening situation. And so, as you go through this, and your loved one has an incident, maybe your loved one doesn't come home when they're supposed to come home. Maybe your loved one doesn't answer a text message whenever you shoot off a text message. Your brain's going to automatically go to system 1 thinking. Fast, emotional, quick, solve the problem, do it now. Fast, emotional, quick, solve the problem, do it now. The rational part of your brain, the frontal cortex, the abstract thinking part of your brain where you're able to sit down and actually make decisions and act in your own best interest, it goes offline in your hot zone, your system 1 thinking, which is centered in the midbrain. It goes online, and you go on automatic pilot. And if you've ever had a loved one go through something, you know that's what happens. You go on automatic pilot, and your brain kicks into all those same learned behaviors, the things that you've been doing your whole entire life, the rescue that you've been making your whole entire life. The same response, maybe even the overly confrontational, the overreacting response. So how do you learn to slow down system 1? Remember, system 1 is the part of our brain that makes us just go on automatic pilot. How do we slow that down? What are different things that we can do? The first thing is that you can step back from the situation. You don't need to make a decision immediately. You don't need to react. You respond rather than react. You try to develop a game plan that you're going to sort of like stick to. You have these conversations beforehand. Let's just give a scenario. Let's say you have this is not an uncommon thing. Let's say you have a 20-something and they've gotten into some stuff and they've gotten into a bad situation. They've gone off to rehab. You know, they're in rehab for 18 months. Let's just make up a good scenario. They're there. They've gone to inpatient. They've completed primary care. They've gone to a sober living facility. They've gone to, they've stepped down even to like a Oxford House level 1. I mean, they've been in the system for 18 months. But they're still, early on in this process. They're still only 21 years old. So they come home and they move back in with you. Oh, can you feel the tension? Can you all feel the tension just based on that scenario? So they're living in your basement, and they come home, and when they first come home, they're doing pretty well. You know, the first 30 days, they're going to meetings, and they're coming home after meetings, and they're really not doing anything that unusual, but you're still on pins and needles because you're not sure what's going to happen. And then they say, hey, I'm going out tonight. Who are you going out with? Just some friends that I met at a meeting. I met some friends at a meeting. And you're like, oh. And what happens? Boom, it kicks in. All the what ifs. He's with his friends. I don't know who he's with. That kind of thing. So you're setting yourself up. You're revving yourself up. You know it. Y'all know it. You've done it. Don't act like you haven't done it. You know how to rev yourself up. The what ifs. What if this is who they're hanging with? What if that's who they're hanging with? What if they're going over to that dude's house? I know that dude's not good. What if they didn't go to an NA meeting at all? What if they've been lying to me? I should put a tracker in his car. If I put a tracker in his car, I'll know where he's going. I'll hire a private detective. If I hire a private detective can, and then all the worst case scenarios start to come up in your mind. Oh my gosh, if he gets caught, he's going to jail. Oh my gosh, if he gets caught, I'm going to have to kick him out. He's going to live on the streets forever. Oh, but the only thing that actually happened was your son said he's going out with some friends. That's the only thing that happened. Nothing else. So you've gone 0 to 60 based on one comment. And here's what I want to tell you. That is your brain's automatic thinking. That is not willful on your part. You are not crazy for doing that. But here's the other thing I want to tell you. You can learn to bring it under control. And as soon as you realize you're going there, the earlier in that train of thinking that you interrupt it, the easier it's going to be to get it back on control. Oh, but let's take the scenario further. Let's say he does go out with his friends. And you say out the door, he's walking out the door, say, hey, Georgie, remember, George, you got to be in by 12 o'clock. Ah, come on, what the hell? I'm 21 years old. All right, you can be in by 1, but no later than 1. And then you know what happens. Georgie doesn't come in at 1, and you start texting him. And when you're texting him, he's not answering. Boom! I'm talking boom! Blow up. Your head just explodes, man. And I've been there. Listen, I want you to know how I know this. Because I've chased my daughter around my hometown in Pittsburgh, convinced, 100% convinced that she was engaging in all the old bullshit that I used to do. Okay? So I know I'm very, very good at going 0 to 60. So now you're 0 to 60. Now you have a fundamental choice. Listen to me. You have a fundamental choice in that moment. You can go with that. You can go that 0 to 60 methodology. You can continue down that road. You can keep saying it to yourself. You can keep working with it. You can keep, just blowing it up in your mind. Or you can step back and you can sit down and you literally can say to yourself, listen, yes, he or she may be in a bad spot right now, but there's absolutely zero that I can do about that right now. And it's going to be painful and it's going to be difficult, but as you learn to do that and you learn to calm yourself down and you learn to take a deep breath, you got to learn to take deep breaths. You know what I'm talking about? Take some deep breaths. Practice out there. Lamaze type stuff. All that good stuff. You calm yourself down. Now look, I'm playing with the way that you breathe. That's not the way you breathe. You breathe slowly in and slowly out. And as you do that, you calm down your physiological response to the situation. Okay? You start to, what can I control? What can I not control? Okay, maybe I can call. Maybe I can take a ride by somebody's house. But they may not be there anyway. You start to go down the checklist. And then more important than anything, because you're going to get through this night. You're going to get through this night, and it's probably not what you think. It's probably not going to be as bad as you think. It's probably going to be okay. They're probably going to get through it. You're going to get through this night, but here's what you got to do. You got to then start moving into, how am I going to handle this when they come home? Because here's the thing. You can't be put through that. That's no way to live. I know it's no way to live because I've done it before. Who wants to be up all night sitting in that freaking chair waiting for their kid to come home? How can you start to compartmentalize this self? I know it sounds like I'm talking like a business meeting. I know it sounds like I'm talking like this is easy. There's nothing easy about this. But you start to change your responses to situations. And then when the person comes home, you're going to have to have a very serious conversation. Now let's talk about that conversation. I hope you guys are following the scenario. Real brief in case you just joined, let's redo the scenario one time. 20-year-old goes off to rehab. Treatment superstar in rehab, does everything he's supposed to. Goes to a halfway house, goes to sober living. He's there for 18 months, all right? But he's only 21 when he comes back home, and so he has to move in with mom or dad. And you can apply this to anybody. This could be any age. This could be any situation. This technically be the same thing with a spouse. So don't get caught up in the age. So they come back, and they're living with mom and dad, and they break curfew, and they're out, and they're not responding to text messages. Okay? And now you get to this situation where you have to actually address it. And here's how I suggest you address this issue. I don't suggest that you come at it from a rule-based point of view, because the person is 21, and what they're going to do is they're going to push back on that. And they've already demonstrated that they don't respond real well to just straight up consequences. And remember, their brain is probably still healing and all that kind of good stuff. So here's what you say. Rather than saying, here's the rule, you have to be in at 1 o'clock, you say, here's my boundary. This is for me. It's not about you. I'm not trying to control your 21-year-old behavior. I'm trying to not lose my mind. I'm trying to not be up all night. So as long as you live in this house, you have to come in at 1 o'clock. And when if you don't do that, we're going to have to take the car, because we can't live this way. We just can't live this way. And then see how the person responds to this. And what you're doing is you're playing a game. It's psychological gymnastics. You're trying to accomplish the same thing, but what you're doing is you're putting the ball in his court. Hold on, another break. Sponsored by LaCroix. This is Rich Jones, sponsored by LaCroix. LaCroix, the best bullshit water out there. Everybody should have a LaCroix. By the way, I'm not going to swear anymore. I'm working on it. Give me a break. I just had a relapse. It's just a relapse. I'm getting right back on track. Okay. All right. So you set those boundaries and you work on those boundaries and you start to try to change your response. Here's the other thing. And again, this is the other just pointer, regardless of how old the person is you're dealing with. Try to check in with the person, with the individual that you're dealing with. Try to check in with your loved one when things aren't going bad. Here's what tends to happen where addiction is concerned. We tend to only have these conversations. We tend to only have these interactions when the crap's hitting the fan. When the crisis is right, when the person's hammered and they're over in the corner and they're passing out, or when so-and-so doesn't come in on time. That's the only time we tend to talk about this. Why don't we talk about it on an ongoing basis? Why don't we just make it a routine part of the conversation? Have lunch together. Have coffee together. Now, I know sometimes you don't even have access to your loved one. I get that. I get that there are very, very desperate situations where people are already out of the house. This is more I'm talking about if you still have an interaction or you have a relationship with them. But I do also think that no matter where the person's at, that contact is good. The idea of no contact, that's old school. That's not really true, guys. It does apply to certain situations, but many times contact is good. So maybe you talk about this on an ongoing basis. And then the other thing is, who is on your team? Who else needs to be in this conversation? It can't just be one person. If mom's on the board, dad needs to become on board, grandma needs to. You need to find as many people as possible to support you through this process. It's not always possible, and I get that. All right, so I want to shift gears because we've been at it for a little bit. First of all, does anybody have any questions? Is there anyone out there that has any questions? If so, shoot them to me. If not, I'm just going to continue to go, and I'm going to shift gears into a couple other things. I'll respond to any questions along the way. All right, a couple other things. Let's just talk about family recovery in general then. Let's talk about this idea of how do you take care of yourself. We talked a lot about how do you deal with boundaries, and we talked a lot about how do you deal with this, the uncertainty of these situations. But how do you keep How do you manage your own stress? And let's just start knocking them out. Let's just get right into it. All right, the first thing I recommend, have some type of morning and evening routine. Bookends. Let's call them bookends. How do you start your day and how do you end your day? Things that you hear people talk about that are very, very effective. Some kind of devotionals, things that you can read in the morning. Things that center you, prayer, meditation. In the evening, why not do a journal? Why not write down 3 good things? 3 good things that happened to you that day. And I don't mean a gratitude list. A gratitude list is good, but a gratitude list is too generic. It's too wide open. A gratitude list is like, I'm glad I have my job. I'm glad I have my health. I'm glad I have my family. Not that type of thing. Like 3 specific good things that happened to you today. Like today, you didn't know that this Facebook Live was on, but you stumbled on it and it was just spectacular. That would be a good thing. Or maybe you were running late for a meeting and you got there on time. That would be a good thing. Or maybe you didn't expect to hear from your adult son and you got a call from him today. Very specific good things. Do that in the evening, and I suggest that you finish your day with prayer and meditation. I'm not talking about any certain type of, whatever your experience is around a higher power, whatever that may be, you follow up with that. It's not, but you start and end your day with that type of routine. A couple other things. I want to talk about redirecting your thinking during the day through a continuous check-in process, awareness process, and continuous effort in redirecting your thinking. For me, that literally is ongoing prayer the whole entire freaking day. Dear God, please remove this thought. Dear God, please remove this thought. Trying to redirect your thinking and not give in to the overwhelming worry and stress that pops up through the course of the day. Sorry, just looking to a question here. My bad. All right. Another thing, exercise. We understand that exercise works very well with stress. There's also the free 3. Hey, I'm obsessed with the free 3. Because here's the other thing. I'm on a kick about recovery in general. Family recovery is just as important as individual recovery. But you know what? It's recovery beyond that. Because even for those of us in recovery, what is it? We really need to learn how to manage our emotions, manage our mental health, take care of ourselves. You want to know a kick that I'm on? I am on the free 3. I walk. If I can't run, because I had an issue with this, and I have solved this, but if I can't run, I walk. And it's even if I walk around this building. I know the people in this building, in this office complex, I do laps here. Boom, boom, boom. I know they're like, there goes that dude's freaking nuts. He's just walking. Oh, he works over at that recovery center. That's crackhead there. I know that's what they're saying about me. That was probably... They're probably not quite saying that. But you get what I'm talking about. I'm walking around the building all the time. I'm out in the sun. The free 3, the first one, get outside. The second thing, listen to music. I have a very wide-ranging taste in music. You would be very surprised at the different types of music that I like. Here's what I'm on to lately. Like late 90s, early 2000 rap. East Coast. East Coast more than West Coast. I'm talking like, Biggie, Diddy, those guys, people like that. Also, what's that genre where you got like Busta Rhymes and you got like Q-Tip, Tribe Called Quest, all that kind of stuff? I've also been getting into that like electronic techno dance music lately. So get outside and listen to music. That's 2 of the free 3. The third, laugh. And perhaps this is more important than anything. Find something to laugh at. Pull up YouTube videos. Watch this. Make fun of me. Do whatever you got to do. Find something to laugh at. Chris Freeman just shouted out. He's an Ice Cube fan. Dude, Ice Cube's West Coast. I'm down with that. But who's not an Ice Cube fan? For sure. For sure, Ice Cube. So the free 3. A couple other things that are out there. What are you doing for fun for yourself? Other than the free 3, other than a little bit of laughter, other than getting outside. What are you doing for fun? When was the last time you went and did anything for yourself? And here's another thing. And this is maybe where I'll finish this bad boy up. Because I've been at it here for about 45 minutes. Longer than I intended to go. you can't be down on yourself for this situation, because the other thing that I'll see happen, let's talk about two categories. Let's talk about spouses and parents. The first thing the parents will do is they'll start saying, where did I go wrong? What's wrong with me? I'm the world's worst parent. I didn't do this right, or I didn't do that right. You're going to compare yourself to other parents. You know, we live in this world where like it's all image-driven bull crap. None of it's true. It's just impressions. It's just images that are thrown out there. You know, marketing exists. Marketing in America exists to make us feel bad about ourselves, so we go buy stuff. Try to step back from beating yourself up about the situation. If you're a parent, try to step back from that and take honest stock of the situation. It's not about what you did right or what you did wrong. It's not about, did I enable too much? Did I not enable enough? Was I there too much? Was I not there? Is it my fault? It's none of that stuff. Look, man, it stands on its own merit. Substance use disorder stands on its own merit. And you have enough going on your plate. Let go of that. And if you're a spouse, I'd say the same thing, because the spouse is, you know, how did I marry this knucklehead? Where's the dream going to go? Where did I go wrong? What's wrong with me? Why doesn't he love me enough? Why doesn't she love me enough? What can I do? You got to step back from all that stuff, man. All that stuff is false. It's addiction. It's how addiction rolls. It hides in the corner and tries to drag us down. All right. So here's what I need from y'all. I need you to weigh in on this format. I did it tonight because I usually do family group. And I was here. I was at Favor Greenville anyway. And so I decided to get on here and do the group. I need to know whether or not this is a worthwhile thing to do. I'll do it more. I'll do it better. This is our very first time. We'll get this down. And maybe what I'll do is, in addition to a Monday night group, I might add an online group once a week. Just in general. But I need feedback from you. I need feedback from you guys out there on whether or not you think this is a good idea. All right. And just remember, man, you got to keep your freaking head up. If you're watching this, keep your head up. I'm with you. Check out, now a couple other things. Check out recoverycartel.com. recoverycartel.com. Check it out. Subscribe to my YouTube page. Start following me. Look, there's a lot of people out there trying to tell you how to do this thing. You're going to hear from a lot of people who say that they're experts, and some of them are pretty good. But let me tell you, man, nobody brings the heat the way I bring the heat, and y'all know it. You know, watching this thing, you enjoyed it. So let your friends know and check out Recovery Cartel. This is the real deal, and I'm in it with you. I'm signing off. Have a good night.